Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Afternoon, I'm Deb Crawford with Kim Ricketts Book Events. Today we're bringing you Dr. Francis Slakey and his new book, To the Last Breath, a memoir of going to extremes. Dr. Slakey is the Upjohn Lecturer on Physics and Public Policy and co-director of the Program on Science in the Public Interest at Georgetown University. He is also the Associate Director of Public Affairs for the American Physical Society, where he oversees all legislative activities, specializing in energy and security policy. Dr. Slakey became the 28th American to summit Mount Everest in an unguided expedition that was the subject of the movie Beyond the Summit. He is the first person in history to both summit the highest mountain on every continent and surf every ocean. In recognition of his adventures, as part of the 2002 Olympic Games, he carried the Olympic torch from the steps of the U.S. Capitol. Dr. Slakey received his Ph.D. in physics from the University of Illinois. He has written widely on science policy issues, publishing more than 50 articles for the popular press, including the New York Times, Washington Post, and Scientific American. He has served in advisory positions for many organizations, including the National Geographic, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Creative Coalition. He is a fellow of the APS, a fellow of the AAAS, a MacArthur Scholar, and a Lemelson Research Associate of the Smithsonian Institution. Please help me welcome Dr. Francis Slakey.
So when I first talked to a publisher about writing a book, they asked me a question. And they said, "What's the arc?" I thought, well, no problem. I mean, of course I know what the arc is. We all know what the arc is. This is the arc. And they said, no. We don't mean this arc. We mean the arc of your life, the story of your life. But, okay, well, here is the arc of my life. Now, you might think that the natural place to start my story is at the beginning. But in my case, that would be a mistake, because at this point in my life, I was really boring. So I'm going to jump ahead to when I was 37 years old. And at that point in my life, I was here. So I was climbing El Cap, 3,000 feet of sheer vertical granite in Yosemite Valley, California. And actually, when my story starts, to be specific, I am right about here. About 2/3 of the way up, and I'm in a cot. Only when my story starts, it's not 7 in the morning when this photo was taken. It's actually, it was actually midnight. So it looked more like this. And I'm out of balance. I'm hanging just dangerously off center. But I'm oblivious until some dim awareness for the world shakes me awake. And I lift my head up, I look down at my feet, and sure enough, I'm not flat. The cot is actually tilted, dangerously tilted. Now, the day before, we had taken blocks of metal and we had jammed it into cracks in the granite and pulled it down tight, snapped the cot on. So there is no way that those blocks of metal are coming loose. So something else has to be going wrong, just horribly wrong. And as my eyes adjust to the dark, the strips of webbing that are holding the cot together come into focus. And I can see that one of the strips of webbing is unraveling. And I realize that in a few moments, that strip is going to come completely undone. And the cot is just going to drop out from under us. And there is nothing we can do to stop that from happening. So I look over the edge of the cot, down into the void, and wait for the inevitable. And I fall. I fall. And at some point in all our lives, we will all fall. We will all fall. The question is, what kind of person are we going to become when we get back up? So I'm going to tell you what kind of person I became when I got back up. But in order to show you what kind of person I became, I have to show you what kind of person I was. So let me take you back in time 20 years. This is the scary part of the talk. I'm going to take you into my physics classroom 20 years ago and show you what it would have been like to be in my physics classroom. So here it is. A block of mass m is on an inclined plane at angle theta. There's a force acting on the block of m times the gravitational constant g. There's a normal force acting on the block, and there's a frictional force acting on the block. The question is, what is the acceleration of the block down the inclined plane? Oh, that is boring. But that's what I did. I mean, 20 years ago, I was just the classic old-school physics professor. Chalk in my hand, back to the students, and the only person talking in that classroom is me, and for 50 minutes straight, I would just scribble away formulas on the chalkboard. And the students would just take notes. That is all science was to me. That is actually all life was to me. Analytic and detached. In fact, at the time, I had 3 rules at that time in my life. 3 pillars, my foundations in life. Pillar number 1. I, Francis Slakey, would never get married. I would never have kids. And I would never buy a house. Okay, I wanted no attachments whatsoever. And then, when I was 37 years old, after decades of climbing and surfing, I decided I would try to become the first person to summit the highest mountain on every continent and surf at every ocean. I called it the first global surf and turf. So I would complete the first global surf and turf. And at that time in my life, nothing else mattered but doing this. And then everything changed. All of it. Those pillars, they all fell. And I can tell you the place on this map that started to bend my life. And it was right there. The Himalayas. So let me take you there. So I was heading up Mount Everest when Sherpas, these guys, Pemba and Angnima and Angfurba and the gang, so they suggested that we ought to stop into a monastery and get a blessing. And it turns out that the Lama there at the monastery, they believe, is a reincarnate. They believe he's been around for 300 years. So I thought, okay, fine, we can go in and get the blessing. And while I'm there, why don't I ask a question? I mean, it's not every day you get to ask a question of somebody who they claim to have been around for 300 years. So I figured I would ask him the meaning of life. So we went in, we got our blessing. So there I am, I'm getting my blessing. And there's the Lama, and he's giving me the blessing. Now, moments after this is when I pop the question, what's the meaning of life? And he's got a translator beside him. So I ask my question. The translator says it to the Lama, and then the Lama thinks, and he whispers back to the translator, and the translator says, are you guys ready for this? 300 years of deep reflection. This guy's been doing nothing but meditating for 300 years. And now he whispers it back to the translator, and the translator says, so I shrugged this off. I figured nothing's going to come of it, right? But then that night, a monk shows up to my tent with a bundle. And I unwrap the bundle, and inside of it is an amulet. And etched onto the amulet, the Lama has written these letters. Well, what does that mean? So the next morning, I go around camp looking for a translation. So I go to those Sherpas that I showed you in the other picture, Pemba and Angnima and Angfurba, and I say, what does this mean? And they say, very, very old writing, powerful, full of life's meaning. But nobody could translate it. So instead, what Pemba did is he took the amulet and he sewed it up tight in a pouch. And he gave it to me and he said, wear this around your neck and never, ever take it off. All right. So 3 weeks later, I'm heading for the summit of Everest with this around my neck. And I was heading up into a storm. I knew it. I knew I was heading up into a storm. In fact, a movie was made about our expedition, and there's actually a moment in the movie where I look at the cameraman and say, yeah, I know I'm heading up into a storm. It's just crazy. And there was even a moment when I could have turned around. So I'm on the south summit, and I'm in a blizzard. I mean, it's just a whiteout. I can't see more than 10 feet in any direction. I radio down to camp. I tell them the conditions. I click out. And I think, maybe I should turn around. I've been on the mountain 57 days. I am 500 feet from the summit. And I'm thinking, weather's bad. Maybe I should turn around. And at that moment, literally, the storm blows underneath me. So it's still blizzard. The blizzard is hammering away, but it's all below me now, right? And it's like I'm standing on this ocean of clouds. I'm looking out, and I can see the whole storm, but now I'm standing in the sunshine, and I look up, and I see this. And it is the summit, and it is just calling to me. And just, for a sense of scale, that right there is a climber. So I decided to push on. Now, I'm on a ledge. I'm on the south summit. So pushing on means I have to go back down into the storm, cut across the knife edge, and then I figure I'll pop back up. I'll pop back up into the sunshine, right? So I go down into the storm, and I never see the sun again. So, I tagged the summit. And if any of you are wondering what it's like to tag the summit, I'll tell you what it was like for me. So go out and run 10 wind sprints, top speed, fast as you can. Don't take any breaks between them. Just run your 10 wind sprints, and then when you're finished with them and you're gasping for air and you got your hands on your knees, try breathing out of a cocktail straw. That's what it was like for me. I mean, I was just sucking wind. I was gasping. So I'm exhausted. I'm alone. I turn around, and I'm heading right back into the teeth of the storm. So it's just 3 breaths and a step. 3 breaths and a step. Just step. Just one step at a time. And I get down to about here, and I can just make out 3 people in front of me. I could just see them in the storm. I can only see about 20 feet, but I can just see 3 people in front of me. And they're talking. I can't hear a word they're saying because the wind is just howling. But then suddenly one of them sits down, and the other 2 keep on going. And at that altitude, in those conditions, sitting down can only mean one thing. Whoever just sat down has decided to die. So the next 8 hours of chaos are all laid out in the book. All I'll tell you now is that we all made it. We all made it. And when I got back down to camp, I'm peeling off my gear, and that's when it suddenly hits me. I realize we got out of there. We didn't freeze to death. We all made it. And a buddy of mine snapped a picture at that moment. And I look at that picture now, and I'm thinking, how do I read that expression? Is it exhaustion, relief? In any case, after the picture's taken, the Sherpas come up and they surround me. And they say, "We know how you made it out of there. We know how you made it out of there. We know why you aren't frozen to death today up on that ridgeline of Mount Everest." And the reason they say is because of what I had around my neck, the amulet. I had a different view. No. I mean, we didn't survive 22 hours in the death zone of Everest, oxygen tanks empty, in a blizzard 40 below zero because of the amulet. We survived because of the heroism and selflessness of one of my climbing partners, and because of science. 7 layers of science, to be precise. And I want to show you what I mean by that. But to do that, I need a volunteer. I need somebody to come up here and volunteer their right foot. You can bring the rest of your body up here, but I need you to volunteer your right foot. And what we're going to do, I'm going to show you how I kept my right foot from freezing. Okay? So, who wants to volunteer? Come on. There is one hitch. You have to have a foot size smaller than 10. 10 or smaller.
Well, that's not going to work.
Who's next? Okay, great. So pop off your right shoe and sock and take a seat. So what I'm going to have you do is you're going to actually put on everything that I took off that day, layer by layer. All right? So here we go. Layer number 1, the liner. Polypropylene. Everybody know what this material is? You're probably all familiar with it, right? And you know the way it works? It's actually counterintuitive. It's an ultra-absorbent fabric, right? So if you take a drop of water and you put it on cotton, and cotton is the devil's fabric at altitude, by the way. If you take a drop of water, you put it on polypro, that drop of water will spread out about the size of a pancake. Okay? That same drop of water only spreads out to about the size of a penny on cotton. So what it's doing here is it's spreading out, maximizing the surface area so that your own body heat can evaporate away. Okay? That's layer number 1. Layer number 2. Now, if they called this a plastic bag, which is what it is, they can only charge about 50 cents. But if you call it a vapor barrier liner, you can charge $8. And so there's the vapor barrier liner, and that's going to keep any kind of moisture from soaking through to the remaining layers. Okay, layer number 3. The sock. Okay, so again, no cotton. That is polypro, like the first layer, with wool woven in. Okay, so that's your first warmth layer. Okay, layer number 4. Now we're bringing in some heavy-duty warmth. 5 millimeters of alveolite. And you're actually familiar with this material too. It's a closed-cell foam. So, you can take a styrofoam coffee cup, fill it with boiling water, and then pick the cup up and you won't scald your hand, right? And the concept is it traps the heat. Same thing here. Closed-cell foam is going to trap your body heat, and that's actually what's going to keep you warm. Okay? That's good enough. So that's 4 layers, but you're nowhere near ready for 40 below zero temps and knee-deep snow. You need 3 more layers. You need another warmth layer. You need a tread, something you can walk in. And then you need something that can keep you windproof and waterproof all the way up to your knee. So in my case, I have all of those in one single moon boot. So it's another 7 millimeters of alveolite, the tread, the boot, and then a Gore-Tex outer shell to make the whole thing windproof and waterproof. So there you go. And while you're snapping that on, you guys probably noticed that that last layer doesn't have any laces. It's all Velcro. And is there any idea why? Yeah, exactly. Because everything that we're doing with everything we're doing with our feet, we do with our hands too. So your hands are also encased, so you have no dexterity whatsoever. So if you have to make any adjustments, it's got to be really simple on that outer layer. So that's good enough. There you go. So your right foot is now ready to climb Mount Everest. Congratulations. Now, while he's popping all of that off, let's think about this for a second. So how long did it take him to put it all on? Maybe 2 minutes? So now that you know how to do it, now that all of you know how to do it, how long do you think it would take you to put that on? Minute? when I was at 26,000 feet, so I was at high camp, and I woke up at 10 o'clock at night to go for the summit, and I put on that boot. At 26,000 feet, thanks, at 26,000 feet, the air has about half the oxygen it does at sea level. And the effect of that is just to slow everything down. I mean, it's like you're just moving through molasses. So I woke up 10 o'clock to put that boot on. It took me a half an hour. And I didn't even notice the time was going by. And I looked at my watch and said, what, half an hour? I got to pick up my pace, man. But I had to remind myself to pick up the pace because sort of left on my own, it was just slowing down. It was like time was being stretched out like taffy. Seconds were being stretched out into minutes. And that's the point. That's the effect altitude has. So Everest was a place where time just stretched out like taffy. There was another moment on the journey when time just stopped. Time just stopped. But before I take you there, I got to tell you that not every moment on my journey was filled with calamity and grief. Okay, there were plenty of just spectacular places along the way. So let me just mention a couple of them. So here are clouds coming over the Shira Crags on Kilimanjaro. Here's a wave breaking at Plage des Nations in Morocco, spectacular. And here's a rare blue sky day in the Alaska Range climbing Denali, and just, again, for scale, right down there, all those little dots are tents. So, no, time didn't stop at any of those places. Those were just spectacular. Time didn't actually stop until I got here, the jungles of Indonesia. Bullets from a Steyr assault rifle punch through the sides of a Jeep as if the doors are made of paper. The bullet covers the next couple inches to the passenger in fractions of a second, and then the bullet contacts the skin, vaporizes it, burrows into the bone where the bullet shatters into 100 pieces that penetrate the internal organs and then cool into hard, blackened flakes. How do I know that? I learned it there, climbing Karsten's Pyramid in Indonesia. Now, rather than hacking through all this jungle to get to the climb, my climbing partner and I decided that instead we would cut through the Freeport-McMoRan mine. And the Freeport mine is the largest gold mine in the world, and it butts right up to the base of the Karsten's Pyramid. And now I have to make a confession. So, in order to cut through the mine, my climbing partner and I bribed the Indonesian military that guards the mine. So, yes, felony offense, I bribed a military officer. In any case, he took the money, and we got in the Jeep, and he drove us up the mine. We went from the mine to the base of the climb, and if you're curious, here's the head wall of Karsten's Pyramid. And we did the climb. We got back to the mine road. We're taking the Jeep down the mine road, and then suddenly soldiers step out in front of the Jeep, and our Jeep comes to a halt. Our driver yells out at him. They start yelling back. I scream at the driver, what is going on here? The soldiers are screaming even louder. The driver's screaming louder. I don't understand a word. Nobody's speaking English. And then suddenly one voice cuts through all of this. Everybody quiets down. This time I do understand it because it's in English. And the soldier says, get out of the Jeep. So we get out of the Jeep. We're surrounded by the soldiers. I figure we have a few moments to figure out what to do. I can only think of one option, and we just open up our wallets to these guys. We give them every nickel that we've got. They take the money. They move away. We climb back in the Jeep and go down the road. And a few days later, we're here. I'm surfing. This is a wave breaking in Bali. So I'm surfing the Indian Ocean. I come out of the ocean, walk onto the sand, pick up a newspaper, and I read a story. it turns out that just days before, another group was traveling through the mine in a Jeep. And at the very same spot, soldiers stepped out and surrounded our Jeep. Soldiers stepped out and surrounded their Jeep. Only in their case, they pulled the triggers. 2 people gunned down dead, 7 more critically injured. And within 24 hours, the Indonesian military announces they got it all figured out. They know who did it. It's the Free Papuan movement, the guerrilla movement on that island. And they know who is responsible for it. Case closed. So let me get this straight. International incident, bloody ambush, 2 people gunned down dead, 7 more critically injured, and they got it all figured out in 24 hours. Who they got working for them? Jack Bauer? Now let me guess something you might be thinking right now. You probably came here thinking you would hear about mountains and waves. What does the ambush have to do with climbing and surfing? Nothing. What does the ambush have to do with what my climbing and surfing journey became? Everything. Because it turns out that there was a survivor of the ambush, Patsy Spear. She was rushed to a hospital. 100 pieces of shrapnel had perforated her internal organs. They actually took her organs out, put them on a tray in front of her, and tweezed out the shrapnel, sewed her back up, and she lived. And 3 months later, I would be sitting across the table from her talking about the ambush. And that changed me. That changed the journey. I mean, I had plenty of close calls before, but never when somebody else took the hit instead of me. I had dodged a bullet, and I met the person that took that bullet full in the stomach. And that changed me. That changed the journey. But, before I could do one more climb, before I could surf one more wave, I had to see what I could do. So I started looking into it, and I started asking questions, starting with this question. What about the possibility that the Indonesian military itself was responsible for the ambush? I mean, they're corrupt, right? I know they're corrupt. How do I know that? Because I bribed them. So, do me a favor. For the next 2 minutes, let's all become forensic scientists. I want you all to become forensic scientists. And I'm going to show you what I found out when I started digging into this. And you can decide for yourself whether the case holds up. Okay? So, first thing I found out. The weapons used in the ambush were Steyr assault rifles. The Steyr is a weapon of the Indonesian military. It is not in the arsenal of the Free Papuan movement. Ammo. Turns out 254 shell casings were found at the scene of the ambush. Previous guerrilla attacks would use about a dozen rounds of ammunition. They were a shabby operation, poorly equipped. They didn't have access to that kind of ammo, but the Indonesian military did. The Freeport ambush lasted a half an hour, and it was 300 yards from a military base. Now, an operation that lasts a half an hour, 300 yards from a military base would be high risk for the guerrillas. It would be no risk at all for the Indonesian military. And then finally, motive. I found out that 2 weeks before I went to the mine, the owner of the mine cut the salary and the perks of the Indonesian military guarding the mine. Within 2 hours after the ambush, the military was saying, see, you got to restore our salaries, you got to restore our perks because you need us. Okay. So I said, give me 2 minutes, become forensic scientists. The 2 minutes is up. Now let me ask you something. If you uncovered all of this information, what would you do? What would you do with this information if you uncovered it? Would you just ignore it? Would you get back to climbing and surfing? Or would you do something? Would you step in? Would you try to steer this story towards the truth? I decided to step in. And I wrote this for the Washington Post. And I confessed to everything. I admitted that I bribed the military, that we were stopped on the road, at the very same spot as where the ambush took place. I said, I saw these guys. And then I asked for something. I asked Congress to do something. I said Congress should suspend all its support for the Indonesian military until the case could be thoroughly investigated, no cover-up. And you know what Congress did? They suspended funding. Not just because of this, but remember that survivor that I mentioned, Patsy Spear? She went door to door to door, knocking on congressman after congressman's door, demanding justice. And against all odds, Congress suspended funding, carried out an investigation, identified the shooters, captured the shooters. The shooters were tried in an Indonesian court, and today the shooters are rotting in an Indonesian prison. And here is why that matters. We just solved a human problem. Not the block on the inclined plane, but we took the same analytic skills it takes to solve a problem like this, and instead we applied it to a human problem. We used those skills to find justice. And so I changed. No more back to the world, chalk in my hand, scribbling away on a board. No, face forward. And when you do, and when you push for justice, not another wave, not another peak, but when you push for justice, you can set things right. So what do you see when you look at a map of the world? What do you see? There was a time in my life where I would look at a map of the world and I would see places to conquer. I would see mountains to climb and oceans to surf. But after what happened in Indonesia, I looked at that map and I saw something different in every single place that I had ever been. And I'll give you just one example. Every glacier that I have ever punched my crampon through is melting. Aconcagua, melting. Elbrus, melting. Kilimanjaro, melting. 600 feet of the Khumbu Glacier melted away since I climbed it. The globe is warming, and that's not the only evidence. Every ocean I have ever surfed is rising. So this map of mountains and oceans is a map of global challenges. And the question is, what to do? And it was at this point in my journey that I made the stupidest decision of my life. I wanted to alert people to the global challenges. So I thought, well, where better but on television, where there's an audience of millions? So what I decided to do at this point, stupidly, is audition for a TV show called Danger Man. This was just colossally stupid of me. There's a lot of reasons why this is stupid. For example, I am not a jackass. And that's exactly what they were looking for, okay? So adrenaline is absolutely my preferred fuel, but crazed enthusiasm doesn't really describe me, right? I mean, I have my limits. In fact, let's pause there. We all have our limits, right? We all have our limits. We all know that there is something we will not do. There is a line we will not cross, right? In fact, we could probably all get agreement on something that none of us would do, right? We could probably all agree to this, right? We wouldn't let someone drive a car over us while we're laying on a bed of nails. We can all agree on that, right? That would just be idiotic. So knowing that I have my limits, I went ahead and put my name in for host of Danger Man. And after 4 rounds of American Idol-like cuts, I made the final, and they flew me off to Hollywood to go and film the pilot. So I'm in the soundstage, and I'm doing, these dopey stunts that they're telling me to do, and I look up and I see the sound man is like punching away in his BlackBerry, and the camera guy's yawning, and I'm realizing this is really boring. And about the same time, the producer realized it too. So he jumps up at his chair. Cut! Cut! And he comes up to me and goes, okay, this isn't working. Here's what we'll do. Let's start off the show with you doing these stunts. And then what we'll do is we'll start bringing on more and more intense stunts. Right? We're just going to build up momentum as the show goes on. And what we'll do, we'll end the show with a stunt that is so wild, so over the top, so intense that everybody has to tune in next week just to see what happens. And he's got a vision for what that last stunt ought to be. And he says this. So I walk out of Hollywood. That was the end of Danger Man. I just left the soundstage. And I went back to Georgetown and did something I probably should have done all along. I made a proposal to the administration at Georgetown. And in the year 2007, we created the program on science and the public interest. And never again would I teach the block on the inclined plane. Instead, it was face forward. I would draw a map of the world. I'd circle the places that I've been to. I'd talk about the challenges that I've seen. And then I'd have those science students break into groups, identify a problem, develop a solution, and then get off of campus and do something about it. And they have been successful. Since 2007, 3 student ideas have been passed by Congress and signed into law by the President of the United States. I've had students go to Mali to work on their projects. They've gone to the streets of Calcutta to work on their projects. And here's the point. Science doesn't just live within the walls of a laboratory. When a student gets inspired by a sense of social purpose, science and engineering become the most powerful tools we have to build a better world. So that was in 2007. By 2009, I still hadn't completed my global surf and turf. I had done all the mountains, but I hadn't done all the oceans. Now, mankind has been mapping the globe for 10,000 years. 10,000 years we've been doing geography. So you can be sure that at this point we know exactly how many oceans there are in the world, right? And if you go to the dictionary and you look up the definition of ocean, here's what you find. There are 4 oceans, Atlantic, Pacific, Indian, Arctic, fine. But being a scientist, I want confirmation. So I went to one more source, and if you go and look up the definition of ocean in the freedictionary.com, here's what you find. Any of 5 principal divisions. 10,000 years of mapping the globe, we still don't know if there's an Antarctic Ocean. Now, the only reason why some maps even show an Antarctic Ocean is because in the year 2000, the International Hydrographic Association took a vote. Only there was a problem with that vote. There were some abstentions. Now, you may figure that, okay, well, any group of scientists, when you get them together, some of them are going to be wishy-washy and are going to abstain, right? But in this case, there were more than just 2 or 3 abstentions. That's no way to form an ocean, okay? So fortunately, the National Geographic did an assessment of its own, and in the Atlas of the World, 9th edition, there is no Antarctic Ocean. And you know what my reaction to that was? Yes! There is no way I wanted to surf the Antarctic Ocean. But I still had to surf the Arctic Ocean. And if you look at an infrared map of the Arctic Circle, you'll find that there's one beach in the Arctic Circle where the temperature of their water runs a few degrees warmer than anywhere else. I wanted those few degrees. So I finally got my opportunity, and in the year 2009, I went to Vestvågøy Island, Norway, to surf the Arctic. Now, if you ever find yourself surfing the Arctic Ocean, here's a tip for you. Never borrow a wetsuit from a Norwegian. The wetsuit boots I borrowed are so loose that my feet are just swishing around. It feels like they're in buckets of ice water. So standing in the water, and actually, I realized cold feet only ranks about a 2 out of a 10 on a 10-point, get me the hell out of here scale. I had been through so much worse in the 12 years of doing all of this. There was the The tongue lashing I got in the dung hut of a Maasai elder, that probably ranks a 6 out of 10. There was the ambush. That was a 9 out of 10. The worst moments, though, those sort of 10-point moments, were in the gym, training and pureeing my muscles and driving down my resting heart rate to a low and efficient 39 beats a minute. And there were plenty of good times to balance out the bad times. So there was meeting my wife on Mount Everest. There was finding a shell in the sand of Lake Namtso in Tibet. And there was this, that amulet. The last few years of my journey, I became obsessed with translating the letters on that amulet. So I'm thinking about all this as I'm riding the last waves in the Arctic. I'm thinking about the good times and the bad times. And as I come out of the ocean and I step onto that Arctic sand, it suddenly hits me. And I finally realized the meaning of the letters on that amulet. And no, I'm not going to tell you. You got to read the book to find out. And you also got to read the book to find out about all the people I've left out in the last 40 minutes of my gabbing. So the snake goddess of Bhutan, Hassan, the crazy Moroccan cab driver, Newt Jayasinghe, the fixer in Lhasa, Marion Jones. They're all in the book. They're all in the book, as well as this final point. The universe is clothed in formulas, these formulas. In fact, I've dedicated my life to uncovering these formulas. But while the universe is clothed in formulas, it speaks in stories, and we have to be mindful of the words. There is warmth and humor, tragedy and heroism, frailty and challenge in the stories of the world. But there is always a way to participate, to restore a torn page, to shape the story. And if necessary, with enough will, by pushing to the last breath, you can steer that story towards something better. That was my journey. This is our journey. Help steer it. Thank you. So how about I take a few questions? Yeah?
So what did you have to do to get in shape to climb these mountains?
I got totally geeked out in my training. I describe it in the book. I came up with my own fitness formula. So it's, you want to hear the formula, the fitness formula I invented? So number of pull-ups I could do, multiplied by how much I could leg press, divided by my resting heart rate. So you guys can appreciate this. All three of those work against each other. So if I try to drop weight to do more pull-ups, then I'm not going to be able to leg press as much. And if I beef up to do more leg press, then my resting heart rate goes up. And what I realized is when I got them all in balance, and that formula is greater than 400, then I'm ready for a climb. And I would spend, of all of those things, I'd probably spend the most time in resting heart rate. So a lot of time doing aerobic and anaerobic workouts. Yeah. Other question? Yeah.
Did you say you had kids?
Yeah. So remember those 3 rules? Let me just say this quick. Remember those 3 rules that I had? There's a danger to forming rules. So I had said, I would never get married, never have kids, never buy a house. So I'm married and have twin girls who are 3 years old living in our house that I own. So all of those rules collapsed. And in fact, I'll say one more thing about the trip too, which comes back to the rules. These mountains can be expensive to climb. At the time that I was doing Everest, the permit to climb Everest was $10,000, and it's for a single climber. So I didn't have that kind of money. My climbing partners didn't have that kind of money. So we had to come up with a fundraising scheme. And the scheme we came up with, we ran ads in magazines that said, you can trek to Everest Base Camp with real Everest climbers. And I thought, what sucker is going to sign up for this? They could do this on their own. What do they need to go with us for? So I thought nobody would sign up. We had to turn people away, so many people signed up. And I remember thinking, man, I can't believe there's that many suckers out there. One of the suckers is now my wife. So yes, I have kids. Was there more to your question?
Well, you said, your life has changed. You started out with that story. You had that line drawn in the sand. I'm wondering how you changed your mind to get married, have kids, buy a house. What was that? How did you do that?
Yeah, you'll see it in the book. I mean, it wasn't just a single moment, but there were several things that happened along the way in that journey that just slowly started changing my perspective on things. And I described one of those moments here today, which is the ambush, the impact that Patsy Spear had on me. That certainly changed my behavior in the classroom. I'll never teach the way I used to before. But other things happened along the way that just warmed me and made those pillars fall. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Do you still wear the amulet? And if not, where is it?
I don't wear the amulet. It's at home in a safe place, right? So, and I should say I became obsessed partly because what you'll see in the book is, a lot of just incredibly improbable things started happening along the way. And I remember tracing it back thinking, where did all this stuff start happening? And it traced back to that if I had to identify one moment, it was that moment in the prayer room with the Lama. I thought, man, he must have known something. I came in there, cocky as hell, asking about the meaning of life, and he must have seen something in me, and he knew I couldn't control the world the way I thought I could, and somehow, whatever he thought of me is embedded in the letters of that amulet, and that's when I became determined to figure out what those letters meant, because it would reveal something about me. One more question? Yeah. Yeah, so I'm done climbing and surfing, right? I don't know what's next. Maybe you can give me some ideas after this. Thanks very much.
Thank you.